As polony, Viennas, cold meats are popular choices in many households. Now, for more, we're joined on the line by a food science consultant, Nigel Sunley. A very good evening to you, Nigel. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Firstly, what should the public's attitude and approach be to this situation, Nigel?
Right, well, good evening to you and to the listeners. I think it is very, very important that we don't overreact and get into panic mode on this. Yes, we've certainly got a problem in a specific area. There's no doubt about that. But everybody's getting very emotional, very worked up, and I don't think we should. I think we need to cool it a little bit. First of all, those products which have been identified as potential sources of listeriosis have been removed from sale, right? All over the retail chains. They've moved very quickly. The products have been taken out of circulation, so people can't buy them. As far as those products that are sitting in your fridges at home, clearly you obviously are concerned about them. You may not want to consume them. I have products like that in my fridge, and I'm still eating them because I feel fairly relaxed about this whole thing. But I understand that people don't necessarily want to do that. So you need to take them back for a refund, but don't overreact. What is happening now is that we seem to be embarking on a sort of witch hunt for all processed meat, which is simply not correct. And the other thing to remember is that even in the unfortunate event of somebody taking in something with unacceptable levels of listeria. And let's not kid ourselves, there is listeria at very low and non-dangerous levels in a heck of a lot of products. But the point is that even if you have consumed a product with listeria in, clearly you shouldn't have done. It's not desirable. It shouldn't be there. We accept that. But most people are very resilient to this sort of thing. Let us remember that there are certain target groups who are specifically susceptible. That is, infants, young children, pregnant women, old people, immunocompromised people. There are some categories of people who should not be consuming these things. But most of us don't fall into those categories. So most of us should not be getting in panic mode. Yeah. That's a very important point.
Nigel, okay, fair enough. The products are being removed currently, and you are advising not to get hysterical about listeria. But why do you think it took so long to detect the bacterium listeria?
Right. Well, this is a very technical issue. One has to understand, and first of all, let me be clear, I'm not a microbiologist, but I'm a food scientist, and I've obviously followed this affair in some detail. It's very important to understand that listeria symptoms only show up in somebody quite a significant time after they have ingested the product concerned. So it takes a long time for the symptoms to show in the first place. And therefore, it becomes extremely difficult to detect what that person has been consuming. And I will give credit, certainly, to the people in the Department of Health and the NICD people who've done some very, very fine detective work in pinpointing what they think is the cause of the problem. But let's be under no illusions. It takes time and a lot of quite complicated science. So, regrettable as it is, these things take time to be determined. And this is a particular problem with listeria. With certain other microorganisms, it's easier to detect and easier to find out what's going on. Listeria is a particularly difficult bug to deal with, unfortunately.
It does occur naturally, isn't it, in the environment, in water and soil as well. In terms of our protocols in South Africa, are you aware of how strict they are in various factories in South Africa?
Well, look, it's very difficult to say what individual companies are doing. The problem is that there's not an awful lot of formal regulation in terms of listeria in products. There are certain requirements in standards for processed meats, right? But in terms of general purpose legislation on microbiological content of foodstuffs, there's essentially nothing on listeria at all. And this is partly, I think, because it's not an easy thing to set out standards for. So the regulations themselves are a bit on the thin side, and the enforcement is a bit of a problem, to put it mildly. And this has already come up in terms of what the minister was saying yesterday, is that we have a very disjointed system of food safety control at regulatory level in this country. Because there's so many different bodies involved, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of people, I think, defending their own territories. And at the end of the day, the South African consumer is the loser. And a lot of us involved in food science have been asking for years for a rationalization of the whole food regulatory system in South Africa, because at the moment it's pretty unworkable. Now, sad as this episode is, and absolutely catastrophic for the people who've lost lives and have lost loved ones, the only good thing that might conceivably come out of it is that we finally get around to doing some sensible rationalization of food law in this country.
Yeah.
It's just a pity that it takes a crisis to highlight the situation.
Nigel, my understanding on listeria, the bacterium listeria, is that it thrives in temperatures below 4 degrees, isn't it? So I guess heat and cooking your food well is the advice. Is the advice also to maintain the strict hygienic and food safety practices?
Absolutely, but that's what you should be doing in your kitchen anyway. The cooking, the saving grace for listeria is that it is destroyed by heat, by normal cooking temperatures for a reasonable period. But people should be keeping their food under the right conditions. Keep an eye on your refrigerator. Keep an eye on what you do. And then if the food that you are putting into that refrigerator is okay microbiologically, then you will be safer. It stands to reason. Clearly, listeria should not be there in the first place. It may occur in very small quantities in some instances, and that is regrettable. But frankly, it's pretty unavoidable because this organism is all over the place. But it should certainly not be there in substantial quantities, and we should be doing everything we can to store and handle our food in a way that discourages microbiological growth.
Yeah. Nigel, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's definitely a big story. We'll be keeping track on this story. That was the food science consultant, Nigel Sunley there. Let's take a bit of a break. We'll be back in